copal. It burns really nicely on the coals in the fire. Good morning. Welcome to life, another day. A teacher of mine said once, he said the first thing we should do when we wake up is just give thanks for another day, to be alive. And what a gift. Today I felt like sharing about the concept of transformation, and specifically for those who are interested in transformation of some type, of healing, of growing, evolving. Then there's a word in Sanskrit, yogic term, tapas. So I want to share a little bit about tapas and the relationship of tapas to transformation. If you're interested in transforming, then you're gonna want to know this, and you're gonna want to understand the idea of tapas. For many thousands of years, we really don't know how long, humans have been interested in making a connection to the divine, right? And there's many different types of that, right? How we make connection to the divine. Many different names, different paths, different technologies, even different methods. But at the end of the day, at least what I think about it, the essence is the same, right? That we are attempting to connect to that spiritual force that's beyond us, with the hope that by doing that, that will bring some form of blessing to us, some form of clarity or insight or knowledge that can help us in our life. And, I studied the work of Robert Moore for many years. Robert Moore is a very well-researched, articulate scientist, psychoanalyst would be a better term for his profession. A person who studied the human mind, and in specific, he studied a lot of masculine psychology. And what he found, Robert Moore carried on the work of a very famous and prominent scientist in this field known as Carl Jung. Maybe you've heard of Carl Jung. And Carl Jung is someone who contributed a significant amount of very important findings, right? Data on the study and the science of the human mind and the psyche. So that's why I say it's psychoanalyst. This is like an emerging field of science, and only in the past 100 or so years where we've made breakthroughs in our understanding of, what is the human condition? What is it that we're all suffering from? Why is it that we struggle? Why is it that we have a difficult time changing and transforming? And what Robert Moore found, and what I found to be very interesting, is that he looked at many different cultures and traditions across the world and was able to identify common themes, and common themes related to this idea of transformation. And for those who are unfamiliar with Carl Jung and his work, Carl Jung was also very into the Eastern spiritual traditions, and specifically yoga. And Carl Jung actually coined the Western model of the chakra system that we know today, bringing the Eastern spiritual science coming from yoga and tantra and bridging it into a more modern and Western psychological lens. And so that's where we see, like, for example, with the chakra system, we see like belonging and security are qualities associated with the root chakra, for example. That was all his invention. The chakra system was not his invention. That comes from yoga. And I want to, without getting too far off track, I want to talk about a little bit of how this all plays into transformation. And what I was saying about Robert Moore, his research and what he showed through the data and through what he was devoting his life to, was this concept that sacrifice is and was present in all major spiritual traditions, that some form of sacrifice was ritualized and made to be an important part of the evolution of the human and the realization of the human's destiny. And that word sacrifice, it can be conflated to mean some things that may not necessarily be positive. Like we might not have a positive relationship or idea about this word sacrifice, but I think that for the context of this video and what I want to share about is, how does sacrifice play into our job or our journey, our spiritual journey, in terms of how we are to become greater than we are. How are we to transform ourselves in a way that's positive and favorable for the benefit of ourself, but also everything in our environment? Because that's really what true spiritual transformation is about, right? It's a change on a fundamental level of our being. Thereby we are we have a more expansive perspective or a more expansive paradigm, and a more our thoughts are more inclusive, and our way of looking at ourselves in the world has less limitation to it. And this is what I think gives rise to the virtues of things like generosity and compassion and kindness and service, like all of these spiritual ideals that are universal in their scope and their application. I think they all fall under this umbrella of like learning how to expand ourselves, ultimately expanding into a new state of being, right? And that's kind of the idea of spiritual transformation, right? And so with the sun's coming up, I can see it just on the mountain over there. Yeah, it's really nice. So with sacrifice, what is it that we're sacrificing? There's been examples of human sacrifice, of animal sacrifice, but on a deeper level, what is the sacrifice, right? What does sacrifice have to do with transformation? And going back to that word tapas that I was mentioning earlier, the yogic term tapas, this term tapas sometimes is translated to mean heat, and specifically the heat of effort. It's like friction. And I want you to think with me for a moment about fire and how fire works and the relationship between fire and transformation. Fire works because friction has been applied at enough length, like a duration of friction has been applied with enough intensity and for a long enough period of time that it creates a combustion reaction. A combustion reaction is where the molecules start to break apart in a chain reaction, leading to the release of the stored energy that are in the chemical bonds of the substance that's combusting, that's catching fire. And fire is the result of the heat and the light that is stored in those bonds. That heat and that light comes from the sun. And a tree, wood, which is the thing we usually burn in a fire, is stored sunlight, stored energy from the sun, and stored heat and stored light that's in the chemical bonds of the plant structure. So that's heat, right? Or that's fire, and that's how heat creates friction, creates the fire, the combustion reaction that then releases the heat and the light. Well, that same thing is happening inside of us when we transform. That friction is applied with enough intensity and for a long enough period of time that something releases, and then energy can change forms. That's what transformation means, to change forms. And I think that's really interesting to think about. It's really interesting to think about how fire and the element of fire as a universal force is present on every level, including inside of our body. And we think about, what is the fuel of spiritual transformation? What is it? What is the wood that we burn in transformation? Well, it's the stuff that we're working through. It's the things that we want to change about ourselves. That's the fuel. That's what we feed to the fire. And through a process that the yogis called tapas. Tapas was the friction that was generated when we started to apply effort, and we started to make the sacrifices that would create the friction and result in the heat of the transformation, the heat that would be the result of the transformation, rather. So we got to burn a little bit, we got to find ways to discipline ourselves to burn. That's going to require sacrifice of some type, some sort, whether it's sacrifice of our time, sacrifice of our resources, with the idea and the paradigm in mind that we are attempting to make contact with the spiritual realm, the divine, to make an exchange happen, right? We're sitting here, I'm sitting here as just this puny little human trying to figure it out, trying to live my life in the best way possible, and coming to the realization at times that maybe what I'm doing is actually, maybe I can be doing things better, or I can be doing things different that would lead to a better result or a more aligned result. And that is that's the question, I think, that when I start to ask myself, what do I need to be doing to help myself? And not just help myself, but help everything around me. Because if I grow, if I evolve, and I transform spiritually, then everybody benefits. And that is going to require that I offer something of myself to the divine fire that sits inside of the heart, or sits inside of the center of my being. The yogis talk about how the fire is the very central channel, and that the sun and the moon are on both sides of that central channel, the Ida and the Pingala. These are the energy channels in yoga. But the central channel is the fire. So that's where, and if you conceptualize for a moment, what does the central channel mean? It's the place of pure presence, of pure potential energy, which exists inside of you, inside of me, inside of everyone. That there is a place inside of us that is just pure potential, right? Before that pure potential has manifested as anything, and any karma, any pattern, any behavior, any thought. A baby's a good example of this, right? Babies are burning inside constantly, and we have to feed them to create the imprint, feed them not just food, but feed them information to create the imprint, to mold their nervous system into what is to become the personality of that individual. Oh no, my memory card ran out of space. Now the sun's coming up. What I was saying was our personality can change, right? Like we can adapt to new situations, new circumstances, create new behaviors, new thought patterns that change ultimately the outcome of our life. And I think if we're paying attention to that, then we can change the outcome of our life for in a positive way. But that requires sacrifice. It requires effort. It requires that friction, the tapas, in order to feed the fire, feed the fuel, create the fuel necessary for the transformation to happen. Now, when it comes to our tapas, right, our the things that we do, the discipline that we apply to create the necessary friction and the heat for transformation, a lot of people would rather avoid that, generally speaking, because it's uncomfortable, It's uncomfortable. And I think that just having a little bit of a change in our alignment towards, what it is that we're doing, why we're doing it, that can be really helpful. At least it's been helpful for me. And coming out here in the morning and working with the fire is something I do to make those offerings physically. And I'm not saying everyone needs to make a fire, but just know that there's a fire burning and it's hungry. There's a fire inside of you that's hungry, and that you can feed it and you can fan its flame and you can make that fire brighter, and it will burn the things that are no longer serving. But it needs to be attended to, and attended to with wisdom and with skill and with precision, because as we know, fire can either warm us or it can burn us. So just keep that in mind as you work with your transformation. Thanks for listening. Peace out.